My name is Joseph Orozco. I'm with the Institute for Anarchist Studies, and I'm here today to talk with some of the editors of an exciting new book that has just been published by PM Press. It's the culmination of a lot of work that they have all put together in a podcast series that is been available. It's now completely out, called "It Did Happen Here," and the book that was just published is "It Did Happen Here: An Anti-Fascist People's History" by PM Press. My guests today are Celina Flores, Erin Yanke, and Moe, I'm going to get this wrong, Bowstern?
That's correct.
Thank you. So I want to welcome you all to this discussion. We at IAS are really, really excited to be able to have this book out there and to talk with you a little bit about it. And congratulations for getting this out and having it out and available.
Yeah, thank you. Shout out to the Institute for Anarchist Studies. All of them, gave us a little bit of funding when we were in the podcast time to actually spend some separate time from our regular lives together to work on it. So we appreciate the actual financial support as well as the moral support and all of that stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, well, this is exactly the kind of thing that we love to see happen, and is part of our mission and our work. So, thank you for that shout out. But congratulations to you all to getting this done. I wanted to, just say, so looking over the project, this really hit home for me in a kind of way because the project starts with an incident that happened in 1988, in November of 1988, with the murder of Mulugeta Seraw in Portland, Oregon, at the hands of white uh, supremacists. Um, I had just come to Portland at that time. I had started going to college in August of 1988, and so when I came to Portland, it was a place that was really sort of magical for me. I felt it was just like this a sort of really beautiful city, and I enjoyed, coming from Albuquerque, New Mexico, just this whole new sort of environment, and the city just seemed vibrant and exciting. And was living in Southeast Portland at the time of the murder because I was going to Reed College at the time. And I remember that this incident really changed my perception of Portland in so many ways. I had no understanding of the networks of neo-Nazi and white supremacist organizing in the Pacific Northwest, and I didn't know the sort of extent of this kind of violence and brutality sort of underneath the sidewalks of Portland, Oregon. And so ever since that point, it's really changed the way in which I understand what life is like in Portland, Oregon, and particularly as a person of color. This really changed my life in a lot of ways. And so personally, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in this podcast and in the book in trying to highlight the ways in which grassroots community folk came together in a variety of different ways to try to combat these networks of white supremacy, and the stories of people that did not get picked up by the mainstream media, and various ways in which mainstream media just also portrayed any kinds of efforts against this as unsatisfactory or as something not to pay attention to. You folks have really sort of shown a light on some important real aspects of grassroots organizing, the things that worked, things that perhaps didn't work, but ultimately lessons about how we might be able to go forward in thinking about how to confront white supremacy, not only in the Pacific Northwest, but in other parts of the United States. And so I want to say thank you from that part, but I wanted to see if you could tell us each a little bit about your role in the I Did Happen Here project, both the podcast and in some sense in the book that is a result of that. So, Erin, could you tell us a little bit how you got involved in this and what your role was in getting the project started?
Sure. So yeah, Mulugeta Seraw was murdered by the members of Eastside White Pride in November 13th, 1988 was when he died. And so I was a 18-year-old punk rocker at the time. My scene at the time was also pretty heavily mixed skinhead scene with both anti-racist skinheads and bonehead skinheads. So this had been a problem for a long time that, you know, different scenes had been confronting in their own way. And then that murder, well, first the proliferation of racist skinheads on daytime TV talk shows in 1986, 87 gave them a national platform. And then this murder was like, this is not just daytime TV, this is real. So I was down the road in Northern California. It really affected me. It affected the way I thought about Portland. And then in November 1989, Maximum Rock and Roll came out with an interview with someone from the Minneapolis Baldies, who then also was forming the Anti-Racist Act. And we were like, beautiful, like people from the scene taking care of business in a way that's actually effective and in the long term. And when I moved to Portland, started volunteering at a community radio station, met a lot of community people, met a guy named Mike Crenshaw, who I knew as mostly a hip-hop person, poet and hip-hop person at the time. Got to be better friends with him and found out he was also a founding member of Anti-Racist Act. So had a lot of camaraderie and, you know, we got to talking about more of that stuff, bigger, you know, more punk scene kind of stuff, grassroots organizing. So fast forward another million years, it's 2018, and the Proud Boys and different Patriot Prayer, all these other groups who've been emboldened by Donald Trump, decide to come to Portland and visibly harass people of color, marginalized communities, and just decide that they can have white supremacist picnics in the park. And the police will then escort them to and from their cars and, you know, give them free balloons or whatever it is that the police are doing to support white supremacy. And the people who were fighting that, the young Antifa folk, were getting ignored by the media, were getting harassed by people who politically should be on their side and weren't, who didn't understand that Antifa is anti-fascism and that anti-fascism is the side to be on. And, you know, all of the arguments of like, if we just ignore them, they'll go away, they'll get bored, all the things, you know, and these kids, and I don't, you know, there are a wide variety of ages, but they're anonymous. So I just think of them as, you know, a group of younger folk, and that may or may not be true. But we're doing all of the things that Mike and his friends had been doing, and that the people who were organizing after Mulugeta Seraw was killed were doing without the support of the larger community, who were also like, yes, murdering people is wrong. Murdering people because you're a racist is wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So it seemed like really the right moment to revisit the Mulugeta Seraw murder and focus on his life and also the organizing that came about after he was murdered to help erase the visible presence of neo-Nazis on the street. And as a younger person, as a punker, I was like, we won, we did it, whatever. Clearly, I was completely wrong. Things went underground. I feel like the whatever, they're better on the internet than we are, whatever. But like a lot of the motivation for the timing of this came about as a response to Portland's, again, flawed, deeply flawed response to people fighting against the visible presence of white nationalists on the streets. And then I was the executive producer of the podcast. So pulled the team together. I have a long history in podcasting and audio work, so it was pretty easy for me to see how it could work and then get the right people to help make it work. Was
Right.
great because I have a deep, rich community of awesome people, and we started doing interviews in early 2019, and then one of the silver linings of the COVID epidemic was that everything social and stopped for a while, and that really helped us meet the goal of getting the podcast released on in 2020. November 13th, 2020 was when the first episode dropped, and the last one dropped in May 2021.
Great, thank you. Mo, could you tell us a little bit about what your involvement in the podcast and in the project has been?
Well, compared to Celina and Erin and Mike, it's a pretty small role. I teamed up with Alec Dunn for the podcast, and the two of us co-wrote the narrations. And I did the research and wrote the show notes. And on the book, it was kind of my wheelhouse was sort of making sure the intros got done for each chapter. Erin helped create the structure of the book. And also I'm just close friends with everyone, especially, Erin and Alec and I go back over 20 years. They were some of the first people I met here when I moved here started moving here around 96. I was living in Chicago in 1988, and I got a postcard in the mail from the ACLU that when they were raising money for the trial in 1992 of Mulugeta Seraw, and at the time I was helping out with an anarchist info shop called the Autonomous Zone. And there was some ARA organizing coming out of there, but my role at that time was mostly just running the info shop and staffing it and doing a lot of the just on the ground neighborhood facing stuff and participating in meetings to just keep the space open. And sometimes at night we would go out and cover over racist graffiti that people had called in about or let us know about. So that my roots are adjacent to this experience, but not necessarily directly in it. And when I did move to Portland, it was just really shocking to me how much more vicious and personal the police were at protests and stuff. Chicago cops are famous for their brutality, and they are just sort of casually brutal, but it seemed at the time like it wasn't that pointed. And then if they did point at you, it was really, really scary. But like going to a protest in Portland was, every time you didn't know if you would get swept up leaving, and just watching cops run their horses right at people, and also targeting specific people that they knew about. And there's something about being in a smaller city that makes you feel more vulnerable because, obviously Portland is a lot smaller than Chicago, but that's kind of my role in just holding this story with everyone and talking about it and really thinking about the deep roots of Oregon's racist policies, just from the founding of it. Like, I was astounded to learn things like in a 10-year period, the number of white settler colonial people, people pushing a colonialist capitalist agenda went from about 9,000 people to 10 years later, 50,000 with the arrival of Marcus Whitman and the missions that were tied in with like capitalism and Christianity really pushing the Oregon Trail. And even now you can really see the Oregon Trail is really pushed hard in the education system, especially in the lower grades. And it's really part of the mythology of Oregon. And this story is not. And this story is as potent and lasting a story as the myth of the Oregon Trail. And it's just like, yeah. And then we came across the Oregon Trail, and then we killed everyone that wasn't like us, And instead, it's the tragedy of the murder of Marcus Whitman. And what's wild is like where I grew up in Haudenosaunee lands in Western New York State is where Marcus Whitman is from, like My sister's best friend went to Mark Spitman High School, so it was just kind of like a weird little coincidence. So just yeah, carrying the story around, lots of conversations with everyone about how to do things and move forward and, you know, carry the story.
Yeah, thank you. No, I want to get into talking about what it means to carry this story, but um, Celina, what has been your role in this? What brought you to this project?
Um, Thank you for having us. I just also want to say, Mo, I think that your role in the podcast was indispensable. You did so much research and writing and all of that. So I just want to give credit to Mo. And I want to thank both Erin and Mo. I've learned so much from both of them and Mike also. So I'm about 10 years younger than I think most of the kind of leaders on this project. And I remember as a kid seeing the Donahue show and the Oprah show where they had the white supremacists. So kind of 10 years behind, I think. But I'm looking at my notes. So I was a producer on the podcast, and I did interviews and research, and I was a co-host on the podcast along with Mike Crenshaw. Um, and I got kind of into the project. I applied, I remember, to do one interview, and then there was a mutual friend, shout out to Tammy, of Erin and mine, and they were a producer and they had to step away, and they recommended me to Erin as a potential replacement. And so, I mean, I've actually talked to Tammy about that and just thanked them for that opportunity because it's been huge. And then, so yeah, I was a volunteer at KBOO. That's how I kind of got involved with the audio production stuff in general and how I met Erin and Mike. And then for the book, I'm a photographer, and so I have some of my photos in the book, kind of updated images and of sites that were important back at the time, more modern images. And a lot of my work on the book, I think, came back with the podcast because I did a lot of the transcription of the interviews and editing of those. And that kind of later got edited for more clarity by the rest of the group.
It's very important doing media work to have a lot of different kinds of people, and having Celina be younger was great because we're like, yeah, like one thing I very strongly remember, we're like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, scene reports, and Celina's like, what's a scene report? And we're like, check, thank you. Let's interview Barton Sprouse and find out what a scene report is, So, and Mo's historical mind and being able to write, from just like, at one point it was like, when does the book start? Well, probably 1619. And then we were like, no, it can't start there because we have to finish this in our lifetime. But, like, it's really important to like have multiple perspectives. And so there was the three of us. Mike Crenshaw was another producer. Alec Dunn, as Mo spoke to, was also then became the graphic designer of the book. Super beautiful. And then Julie Perini was the did a lot of archival work, finding archival images and content, and was kind of a deep researcher in that way.
Yeah,
that's the dream team.
And Alec did a lot of he and Erin did a lot of the sound editing and sound design. It would just kind of go back and forth between them on the podcast, obviously.
right. This is a lot of complicated work, obviously. So it's a big team that you've had to put together to have to do this work with such a really complicated yet compelling story. So kudos to you all for being able to do that. But part of what I wanted to ask was, given that this is a complicated story that you're talking about, not only about what happened after the murder of Seraw, but just sort of the conditions leading up to this, trying to capture that flavor and the history of that. Um, the question might be, why are you the people to be telling this story? Like, how did you get into the roles? You talked a little bit about your backgrounds in the work that you were doing, but why did you decide that this was something that you all had to do? And why do you feel that you are the people that are best positioned to be able to talk about what happened in the story?
Mostly, I feel like Mike has, this is Mike's story of his lived experience of doing this. I was definitely there and part of a peripheral scene and supportive, but really, like, with the timing and being friends with Mike and talking to him. And also, there's like, when Celina mentioned like getting hired, there was this tiny bit of grant money that we got from a woman named Marla Davis died and gave money to KBOO. And part of it was to support fighting the Christian right. And so I was like, great, Christian right, Patriot Prayer, we got this, give us the money, we can get this done. And there was, of course, it was more complicated than that because getting money out of institutions is difficult. But Mike got some funding for that to be able to travel to interview some of the Black skinheads that we talked to in the chapter about the founding of ARA. And I got some money to support myself while we were trying to do the interviews. And then one of the things that I thought was important, because it was money given to a community organization, was to spread it out to the community. So it was like, let's hire people to do the interviews. Celina was one of those people, and that we heard that part of the story already. But basically, Celina and Mike and I did about 80% of the interviews. And then the other interviews, other people did like one interview along the way. So really, we are the ones to tell this story because people would talk to us about this story, is also how we're the ones to do it. I don't know if other people have tried to tell this story before, but it has not happened in a way that made people very trusting, if so. And then, when we did the interviews, some of the first interviews we did, people were very cautious. And then in actually talking to me and meeting me, it was like, oh, okay, well, you're working with Mike, so I kind of trusted you, but now I've met you and I really trust you. And the questions you're asking are important. And so then it was like the vetting process happened by the couple people who stepped forward first. And then they kind of put the word out, like, these people are all right. And that happened, like, one of the people we interviewed called me to vet Celina and called one of their friends before that to vet me. And then it was like, once Celina did the interview, then he's just like, you guys are the best. All right, whatever. What do you need? Anything, So it kind of just went like that, and it snowballed into this thing that I am most proud that the people in the book are very excited about it and proud of it and can share this part of their lives without having to explain everything while they're actually like they can talk about their own experience and be like, here's the context, here's more, here's what my friends thought, here's this. So that is always my primary goal, is the people that I'm working with media stuff are proud or, are excited about the final version of the product. And that was true with the podcast. Then more people talk to us. So there's bonus episodes for people who had said no previously. So that was also very exciting for us. And so those interviews, a lot of those we got to incorporate into the book. So there's no like bonus episodes for a podcast. Like there's a couple appendixes in the book to explain things further, but most people got their stories folded back into the primary narrative.
And this is also Alex's story. He grew up in Portland and was there's several photos in the book of various protests, and some of them the photographs are attributed to him because he was there as a teenager and growing up in Portland and experiencing this as well. And the long friendships that exist between us. You know, even though like when I first started coming through, I was not permanently in Portland, but we were part of a larger network of punk adjacent. I never called myself a punk, but I love punk people. I love punks, and the punks kind of like me okay most of the time. And I just have a neurodivergence that makes it really hard for me to listen to loud music. So and that ethos, that shared ethos of like, it's almost like we didn't have to communicate our values in a way that was like, because we knew them all and we've all worked together on other projects previous to this. So this was just like the biggest project and the most ambitious project. And one of the things I've always loved about hanging out with the punks is how much they love a good story and how well they treat a good story. And that this is all about honoring the story, honoring the life and the ultimate death of Mulugeta Seraw, honoring the stories of the people that are involved. And as Erin said, the pride and happiness of the people whose stories that we told, or at least that they thought they like the book, is a huge relief. And that's like our value. Like we could care less, you know, apologies to PM Press, if the book sells out or if we make any money, you know what I mean? Like we do not actually value that. But what we value is like that this story is alive and can go forward, both as a, like if people don't like to read, they can listen to the podcast, or if they, there's a ton of beautiful photos, and the photos came to us partially through Julie Perini's deep and hard work with Erin in the archives, but also, you know, there's this woman, Coyote, I don't know how to say her last name. Is it Amrich? Coyote Amrich. We found her. She was hung out with the Sharps back in the day and shared all these beautiful photos with us. And when you look in the photos, you can see that the people know the photographer. And that isn't something that you're going to get on the back of a book or an author photo or like whatever, you know. It's just like this story, you know, I've been making zines, I'm embarrassed to say, for 30 years. And it's just like this. I'm proud of it. It's true. Maybe that's where the embarrassment is. But this is just like the excellence and the dedication and commitment to the project and to each other. Is just like that fanatical level of commitment is not something that you can just hire, you know, like, I guess, I don't think. And we just went at it. Like I had no job. I was laid off in the pandemic and was recovering from a cancer situation. And Erin had like 4 jobs in the pandemic. And it was just like, we were all just anyway, that's just, you wanted to know how the book happened. So just a little bit of like what it was like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I like to hear like the real solidarity that you all were able to accomplish with it and made possible the folks opening up to you all. Celina, why did you feel that this was important for you to be a part of? Why are you part of this storytelling?
Well, I have been thinking recently about why I have a passion for justice, racial justice. It's kind of nebulous to talk about, but I will say that I grew up in a pretty diverse environment. My dad was in the military. I moved around a lot as a little kid. And I don't know, I guess I've always had an innate understanding that we're all human. So that's kind of that foundation. And then I love being part of teams and collaborating. That's super important to me. Community is super important to me. And I feel like I was super fortunate enough to, a friend had recommended KBOO to me. And as soon as I stepped foot in there, I was like, oh, this feels like a place where I fit in. And I remember mentioning to Erin at one point that I wanted to be part of a collective that was working on a podcast. And I didn't realize until way later that like came true. It was really cool to realize that. I don't know if Erin made note of it at the time, but it, yeah, came to fruition, which was really, really cool. So yeah, long and short of it is I have a passion for community and racial justice, and that's why this project spoke to me.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the book and the spirit that comes out from the podcast too. Um, One of the real big themes that comes out of both of these is that this story of this grassroots organizing against the white supremacist skinheads and the neo Nazis in the Pacific Northwest. This has been told. This is a story that's been told by mainstream media back in the day, and continues to be told now about what's going on with Proud Boys and Patriot Front and on these other groups. So mainstream media has a story about what's going on with grassroots organizing, um, but part of what the theme that you all are pointing out is that very often mainstream media just gets this story wrong about who's organizing against these white supremacist networks. Can you talk a little bit about this kind of this idea, this theme in your project that about the media bias against grassroots organizing against white supremacy in the Pacific Northwest? Why is this story not really get told in the mainstream media that and sort of created the need for you to be able to do your work?
Well, I just think we need to go back to the fact that this place was founded on the principles of exclusion, like deeply, deeply exclusive. And, you know, I'm the Oregonian, the founding of the Oregonian was the language around its founding was to provide basically like business, to just boost business in Portland in the 1800s or whenever the alcoholic guy that started it, I can't remember his name. And that kind of has continued. And, being known for having homegrown Nazis isn't bad for business, even if it's good for business, if you get my meaning. And acknowledging, like, just white supremacy is, even as liberal cities or progressively minded cities or progressively branded cities try and address, things, it's just like, it's just, I mean, not easy for somebody to just be like, yeah, our city has a problem with race. It's just over and over it's been revealed that the police are working very closely with right wing groups. And Antifa has shown us over and over, like people showing us footage of the police helping right wing groups. And I work in a healthcare industry in the suburbs, and the idea is that Portland is dangerous, and it's just like that's bad for business. And so any acknowledgement of that is got to be squashed, because I obviously don't believe that. I think if something is rotting, you have to get it out into the air. You have to throw it away. You have to deal with it. You have to acknowledge that it's happening, because shutting secrets in the closet is just going to make them fester. And that's what has happened here in Portland for the last 150 years or whatever. Sorry if that's a really broad response. But the Oregonian will not, like, we got no press for the podcast. We did a podcast that was 11 episodes long that has huge people love it. And everybody is just like, I learned so much about Portland. And we got no interviews from the Willamette Week, no interviews from the Portland Mercury, no interest from the Oregonian. And it's in your backyard. And OPB did a whole story where they interviewed John Baer, who you can read about in chapter 9 or hear about in episode 9 of the podcast. Or I think maybe it's chapter 10 in the book. And they never referenced the podcast, and the interview was done a year after. And we were the people that broke John Baer's story. He never told it publicly before he told it on the podcast. So there is an interest in not even letting this podcast be told.
So let me ask this question about, so, it's clear that there's a kind of establishment, not a conspiracy, perhaps a conspiracy, but, just a kind of mentality of trying to keep the realities of the extent of white supremacy in Portland and the Pacific Northwest on the hush to allow business interests to keep on going. That seems clear from what you've all been saying. Part of the question that I have is, knowing that no one wants this story to be told in the establishment elite, did telling the story make you all feel less safe in Portland? Did you feel that your own safety was at risk in working on this project and letting yourselves be known as the people that were trying to amplify the voices of so many people who were actively confronting these networks?
I can answer that just for my little piece. I definitely was like a little trepidatious about it at first. I remember asking another longtime radio show host at KBOO how they dealt with kind of being exposed, having their views be exposed publicly when they often go against some very violent people. And her response to me was that she found protection or felt safer in having her views known. Kind of like people know where she stands, and there's protection in that. There's community in that, which offers protection. Shout out to Ani.
Yep, I have a very similar answer. I think anything that actually builds community and gets stories out helps you be safer. Anything, the part of mainstream society and capitalism is isolation, right? Like, if we're isolated, we buy more shit. If we're isolated, we feel bad about ourselves, and then we're easier to control. And storytelling is not isolating. And that is, I did not feel at risk. I did actually have somebody follow me home one time in the past year in a car. I was in a car. Nothing seems to have come out from it. It was definitely, I was shaken, but I was also like, okay, I'm going to not go home. I'm going to call Mike. Great. Mike's going to help try to figure out who these people are. Great. I'm going to call not anybody else who did the podcast because I want somewhere to go. I don't want to go to anybody's house in case something's with them too. I got to go to another close friend's house. I had so many choices of where to go and of people who I could be like, I am shaken. What do I do? And people that I trusted to be like, come over. I'm like, okay. And then, like Moe came over and stayed at my house that night and we, had some very amazing home security set up for people to trip over when they were going to come at us, which, like it's this stuff like builds the relationships that make it all possible for us to be able to have strong communities and stand up against white supremacy in a better, deeper way.
And, for myself, first of all, I want to say what was really cute about that experience is we got to drink coffee. Like, I drank my morning tea out of the Martin Sprouse. I can't remember what the mug says. She's going to go get the mug. But I was like, in the morning, I was like, it was, it's something like, I don't know. It's about killing Nazis or something. There it is. Nazi lives don't matter mug in the morning. And I also just want to echo a little bit of what those guys said, but also just like, safer than what? I mean, I'm a person that looks like a woman walking, like I'm a bag of femaleness walking around in this fucked up rape culture already. And I've been walking around with my keys between my fingers since I was 18 years old. And I am a paranoid old woman. Like I didn't know how paranoid I was until I got a job at a corporation. And it's just like, I just think everybody's a spy. I think everybody's under the, under the bed. I look all, I'm still waiting in the car when Erin goes in, when I drop her off, when we hang out. Like, also my name is made up. So I have a level of safety that's different than everyone else's. And like the name that I was born under, no one could pronounce it. So I just, as a joke, started calling myself Moe Bowstern because I was a commercial fisherman for many years. And bow and stern, haha. And, punks being punks, they just love my name and nobody mispronounces the first name anymore. And I don't really exist on the internet under my other name. So I have like a real old, punk name protection. Even my phone uses my sister's photo because there's no picture of me on the internet. So I have that in my back pocket. And like Erin said, I mean, we've been cleaning houses for 20 years. I got all kinds of keys.
I want to thank you guys for sharing that experience. But I want to say, right, if you're some kind of normie listening to this sounds scary. I imagine to be followed and to live in this kind of way. And so, I mean, in one sense, you've talked about the kinds of things that uh, might help to encourage other white folk or people who privileged positions to think about taking the risks to become activists. You talked about the sense of community and friendship and solidarity with a community that allows you to feel that you have a place to go. I wonder whether, from your own experience in working in this project, but perhaps also, are there any kinds of lessons from the folks that you talked to in the podcast and in the book that are lessons about how to encourage white folks and other privileged folks to be able to get involved in activism? Because as you've said, confronting white supremacists and violent skinheads, that's scary enough. But as Mo, you were pointing out, that activism in Portland in particular, because of the way in which the history of the police have engaged with activists, that's scary too. So what kinds of things that you think might encourage people to be able to become activists for this kind of struggle?
Well, I would say, at this stage of my life, like, I don't really go to protests anymore because I did get PTSD from protests, especially, after the WTO and other stuff. But I think the activism that I involve myself in now and that I feel like I would encourage other people of privilege and other white people to do is more just like kind of what Scott Nakagawa encouraged me to do. I talked to him after, while we were making the podcast, I had a long conversation with him and he was just like, just join something, join anything, and don't necessarily join something that you're like, join a bowling league, join a games night, join a card group, join anything that is fun for you, and be in that group with people and build that out. And as part of like moving that forward and then sharing your views and always learning and always reading and expanding and speaking up and speaking out. But the activism I'm interested in is more like making sure people are fed, making sure people are housed. Like there's quite a large population of people living on the streets in Portland and on the coast in Astoria. And the rhetoric around that politically is that and even on the national scale or socially, is that people are there because they made the wrong choices, instead of that we live in a brutal capitalist society and we're just living in this level of brutality where people can't live. And especially if you've gone a lifetime without healthcare. I mean, I personally went 27 years without healthcare, and I was extremely lucky and very privileged to have health and be okay and be able to work. But like, if you get hurt, anyway, I would just say, like, figure out a way to engage, find a pathway to what makes you happy and where you can really push your privilege of your time and even if you don't have money to give. And it's rich and it's rewarding, even if it's like, I mean, I'm going to do a summer book club with kids at my local watering hole, which is going to basically like be helping kids learn how to do critical thinking. And I had an argument with them recently. These kids all thought they were talking about patriarchy. I'm just trying to help kids learn critical thinking so that where they can, because I feel like in this time, I don't know if it's social media or internet access or just the barrage of information. I think understanding ideas and thinking about them and being able to contextualize them historically, basically what I did for the book in a lot of ways, is not a skill everybody has. You know, and reading comprehension, it seems really straightforward, but to read a paragraph and then say, this is what that paragraph was about. You know, I had these kids telling me like, well, patriarchy, you keep talking about patriarchy, but patriarchy is just, you know, men oppressing women. And this was like a trans non-binary kid telling me this. And I was like, well, where do you fall in that then? You know, and like patriarchy is like a system oppressing everyone. Men are oppressed under patriarchy, and their little brain was like, boom. So that's a level of activism that can ripple out. Just imagine if every family had a little weird old auntie that just was like, let's read Howard Zinn's Young People's History of the United States.
One thing that I think a lot of white folks get hung up on is like saying or doing the wrong thing and offending people. And I think media is powerful, and maybe it could be beneficial to engage with thoughtfully produced media that showcases the lives of people that are different than white people. Be that books, etc. I personally, I would start with books, but just to get a fuller picture of the humanity of people that white people might not have grown up with or been exposed to that much. Just as a really like simple way to start engaging differently just in our own hearts and minds. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, we have to save these people over here. But it's like, when you have a more complete picture of somebody's humanity, it becomes more like, no, we have to save all of us. So that's what I will contribute.
Mm-hmm. And in opposed to trying to save people, it's like, ask people what they need. If you have something to give to help, ask them what it is and go from there on any individual basis. Like, it all comes together to be something bigger, I think. I also think one of the things about doing any kind of group activity, so like Scott recommends, like joining an organization, is just like one of the biggest ways that problems occur is from social isolation. And so even if you don't have life experience with the group, within your group, like other people possibly have. So it just breaks the social isolation where then you can think something about someone, no one will check you on that because you never say it. And then it festers into like, then blame and then fear and then anger and then violence. So it just so much grows from ignorance and then so much grows from fear. And both of those things can be fought with breaking isolation. I did read something recently where apparently people don't know how to hang out anymore. And it's like a thing that this woman who wrote a book about it was like, well, you know, it's not like people are, you know, excel in hanging out. And I was like, I excel in hanging out. Me and my friends excel in hanging out. We are so good at it. And people should pay us to teach them how to hang out. If you need that, we are coaches. We are available for you. You could just buy the coffee, whatever. But like, just hanging out, like activism doesn't have to be like these prescribed ways where you have to like call 10 people and tell them to do something that they don't want to do during their meal time, or like walking for 10 miles under the hot sun, like getting hoarse yelling the same things. Like the ideas of activism have become very, very narrow. And I think we can just bust it out to just be like, you know, like, hey, I got off the bus and I gave my bus transfer to somebody who's getting on the bus. Activism. Like these things are very small. But it all makes a difference.
Also illegal. Just saying.
For instance, as
well,
maybe
I'm just saying, it's like really
book one time. Thank you.
No, it's great. I mean, it's great to hear you all speak in this kind of way about really seriously trying to think about rethinking activism in a way away from the sort of scary narrative and adding a kind of layer of joyful militancy, right? And the sense of being together. And it's true. I mean, there's a lot of psychological studies that show, particularly like young folk have a real hard time making friends or even thinking that they have friends in their lives. I think that sort of bringing that spirit together in terms of trying to create community of activism is important. But I mean, I do want to get to a sort of a scary part of this again, right? Because of the nature of the work that you're telling and the stories that you're telling. You know, you're telling the story of people that confronted violent white supremacists and beat them back in a way. And so based on, you know, what you see and what you saw from the stories, what are the ways in which we create the kinds of networks that we need now to confront the kind of white supremacism that exists today? There's still a lot of different white nationalist organizations, groups, and so forth in the United States, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest. Um, does it go away? Can it go away? How do we build the kinds of community with joy, but also with strength and resilience to confront this part of our lives?
There's definitely people still doing the work. You know, people remain anonymous because the work is dangerous, but there are definitely people who are continuing to do the research work. The research work, from my understanding, from people that do, I am a media person. I do media work. I do above ground stuff. I'm very visible. So I stay ignorant of details for a lot of reasons. But there are definitely still researchers doing the same kind of work that the Coalition for Human Dignity did. There's definitely still people who are willing to put their bodies on the line to confront white nationalists when they come to town, or when they come to the bar, or when they come to the park, or when they come to the library. You know, there are people who are willing to do that, who are tracking it. And then there are plenty of people who find themselves in the moment, like, you know, the white nationalists come to the library to try to bust up the drag story hour. And people who, this was not in Portland, this was in a town in Southern Oregon. There are plenty of people who were interviewed later who were just like, I was just at the library and I just found myself like yelling at these people like that they can't come in the library. And it was the focus of the one article that I read about it was like, these people felt weird about yelling in the library because they were very trained. And like that was part of the part that I picked up on. I'm like, that is a weird thing to have in this article, but I also kind of appreciate the humanity. But they weren't like going, like figuring out where the protest was or whatever. Like they just was like, this is wrong and we're going to step up for it. So I think even if you might not think that you might be that kind of person, like you might be that kind of person when it comes down to it. So I do think like there are groups. I know this group Popular Mobilization started in 2018. I'm not sure really what they're up to. A lot of groups started and coalesced and merged and broke apart or whatever around all the George Floyd racial justice work. A lot of people switched from protesting to supporting people during the forest fires to then like, you know, putting a free fridge in neighborhoods and working on doing more of the support. Like we're in a society that's in collapse. And so they are working kind of the step what Moe was talking about of like, the government is not doing anything for us. in these ways. We need to support each other and take care of each other. This is a community. Like, here's resources. This is what we have. Here, the city won't let people hand out tents anymore. We're handing out tents. Like, here's some tents. We're handing them out. So it's a lot. I see a lot of the most of the visible work that I see is supporting the vulnerable who are on the streets currently. I also work with homeless youth, so I'm a lot more aware of that kind of stuff. But a lot of the racial justice research work against white supremacy is not something, you're not going to get it. You're going to see somebody working behind a computer. Are they playing a video game or are they doing research on Nazis? Like, who knows? It looks the same, so it's hard to see this work, but it is happening. And if you are interested in it, there are, to start paying attention to where you see little things pop up. Like, there are crumbs to find to get involved.
And as far as building community, I really like what you said, Celina, about just like participating with your intellectually with a broad spectrum of cultural offerings from everybody. Like, watch movies you wouldn't have normally watched. And I think everyone, I mean, certainly white women should participate in the workbook Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. Who it's just brilliant, and it's something that we could revisit all the time. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it's really amazing, and it really changed my perspective of myself, and it gave me a foundation and a language for when I was doing a thing, because at least it got me to notice, like, oh God, I'm doing an othering thing with this right now, and I really don't want to be doing that because I think I'm a good person, and it's just helped me, and it continues to help me. And also just like talk to people that aren't like you. Talk to people that not necessarily are like completely different than you, but like, don't just talk to people who agree with you about everything. And in talking, I would say, like, the social media and the pressures of capitalism set us up to sort of all of us be individual prophets. And I'm using the PH profit on that, and everybody's supposed to monetize every little thing. Instead, like, come at stuff with curiosity and questions. And also, like, huge for me is just like learning how to apologize. I grew up in a household where that did not happen. Like, you stood your ground and you never apologized for anything. And it's so stupid. And, like, at my dumb job that I have now, I'm always just like, oh yeah, I'm really slow. I'm sorry, that was my fault. And guess what? Everyone likes me. No one talks trash about me. That's like my sleeper tactic at this dumbass job that pays my health benefits. So, like, curiosity, like, why am I feeling hot and embarrassed? And then just say it and be like, wow, I just feel really embarrassed right now. Am I making this up? Am I doing a stupid thing? I can't figure out what's going on, but not cringy and sorry and whatever. And to figure out how to not do that, find that line, just like do the Me and White Supremacy group book. Can't recommend it enough. And watch read James Baldwin. Watch that I Am Not Your Negro movie. It's so beautiful. It's so good.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. No, what I hear from you all is a sense of like really building, a kind of this work takes a lot of emotional resilience, right? You have to sort of be willing to open yourself up vulnerably to think about the ways in which we've all been conditioned in a white supremacist society, but also by the energies and the beats of capitalism to force us to think about ourselves and what we do in our communities in certain kinds of ways. But that we can be stronger if we build community around each other to do this kind of individual work, and that this is the work that we need in some sense to confront the problems of white nationalism and white supremacy in society. If I understand what I hear from you. Are there other kinds of things that you feel that need to be heard at this time, or that stories that you may want to continue working on yourself to produce and to amplify?
Me and Mo made a massive list one time of the things that we're kind of similar stories in this, of like things that were of our experience and time that, you know, are not out there. So I can't remember. There's definitely like
How we
the
do funerals.
abortion.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
The you know, like abortion clinic defense, and once again, like one of my favorite classic stories of Moe's is, you know, about how the nice white ladies wouldn't share the pastries with the people who were coming from Chicago to help defend the clinics, and then at the end they were like, "We love you, you're so great," and then the next week they wouldn't share the pastries again, and you just had to constantly prove yourself over and over to people about like, we look like freaks and we have fun and we're loud, but we get the job done, and share your fucking pastries. Like, it's not that hard to share a fucking pastry with someone who's defending an abortion clinic from violent anti-abortion, you know, jerks. So that's one, for instance. I am working on a podcast about a collective here, the Black Cross Health Collective, who, after their experience at the WTO as kind of individual activists, were like, well, we just got our asses kicked with clouds and clouds of tear gas that, you know, the Seattle Police Department ran out of tear gas and had to borrow it from surrounding communities. And that kind of use of chemical weapons hadn't been inflicted on Americans in quite some time at that point. Now it's a very common occurrence. There's a beautiful report that just came out by Forensic Architecture about the amount of tear gas that they inflicted on Portland in 2020, which is, you know, it's a dense read, and I'm getting there, but it's pretty fucked up. So anyway, these people came back from Seattle and were like, we need some kind of antidote to help that. So they did research with the medical things, and also community members volunteered to get pepper sprayed, and then they would try different antidotes on people. And that's how the internationally known, like, Maalox, milk of magnesia and water in your eyes, was, you know, discovered, I guess is the word for it. And then word spread. So if you have ever used that in a protest to help clear your eyes, that is because community members in Portland did the time to discover that. And also, like, yeah, sure, it's a Saturday night, let's go get pepper sprayed, which I find amazing. And then also the collective disbanded around 2004, 2005. And that's when the Rose Hips Collective started, if you're local. Then they became the Black Cross Social Club. And they are actually, like, most of them still in connection and are still friends. And that is something that is very rare story of organizers. Like, even if it's true, like, that is not told as part of the story. And that feels very important in this moment too, as we were talking about social connection, people not knowing how to make friends or connection or community or hang out. Like, how did these people like do this thing, you know? So there's a lot of, like, humor and, you know, struggle and all of that in the story, but it's really like the deep connection is there. Like, doing these things that are difficult leads to deep connection. It can lead to deep connection, and it also can lead to us viciously ripping each other apart. You know, like, strong emotions can go either way. So it's like, here's how people have managed to keep the community that they built. And it's a beautiful story, and I'm very excited to be part of it. And then hopefully I'll do something a little lighter after that.
So Mike Crenshaw had the idea to, can I talk about this? Do you think? To create a podcast that looks at the global psychedelic renaissance in BIPOC communities. And So we're currently applying for funding, and we've done a bunch of interviews. Yeah, so that's one thing that it's kind of looking at, like, stories of healing, the science. What am I forgetting?
I think, like, looking at a way to, how do we heal from trauma? How do we heal from trauma in community? How do we connect back to a bigger picture that people can feel a part of? Mike and one of our other producers, Umnia, met on a trip to the Amazon, and the stories around that, and the different ways that the indigenous communities are supporting, like, especially like urban American Black communities with that deep history of trauma, is super interesting. It should be interesting. I mean, it is very interesting. So I look forward to that too.
So let me ask you this. I mean, to sort of start rounding up a little bit, the work that you all have done and are continuing to do is really about trying to provide stories that can, help other folk come into a movement of community building and strength, giving all the kinds of ways in which we're beaten down by big systematic systems of oppression. I'm wondering ultimately what you hope your book does as an intervention at this moment. So let's say that this book winds up in the hands of a young person who doesn't know very much about, being involved in activism, feels isolated and alone, but sees that there's a lot of stuff that is collapsing around them in society. What, is there something that you hope that this book can tell a young person like that?
One of the things that I would hope is that, especially, that the young person could see themselves in the book in a way, because so many of the people in the book who were organizing, and that is something that we tried to highlight, is that they were young. I mean, obviously the Sharps and the ARA kids and the skinheads were often teenagers. But even the folks in the community, the Coalition for Human Dignity, were in their early 20s. And throughout, like 20s and maybe late 20s, and their mentors were older than they were. And I would hope that the people, that they could see themselves in the book and find a place for themselves. And that is one of the things that Big Tent organizing does, is that, you can look at the picture and you can just be like, well, there's the kids in the braces and the trousers and the sharp haircuts, and there's the kids in the cardigans and the turtlenecks, and which, not that you need to be binary and be one or the other. And obviously I'm for both, and but just that they could see themselves, and that also that they would believe that there are people like Susan Wheeler and Donna Redwing and Stu Albert and some of the older folks who were in their 40s at the time, that there's help, so that we have a place for them in their lives. So, like, my hope would be that people would grab a hold of this book and come to one of our events, and then be able to connect, somebody from Pacific North, the Pop Mob, or somebody could come anywhere in the country to one of, like, of It Did Happen Here event, and find an older activist to help make the web of connection and put themselves in the continuum of this story of resistance that began in 1619, and that we want to see forward into the future, and that this book is just a piece of it, and that we could show that there's a continuum, and you're not alone in an isolated little bubble, and it isn't a situation where you can only trust people that are just like you.
Totally. Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of people in this book. They don't agree on very much. That's one of the things that we tried to really stay true to is like there wasn't one way to think about stuff, and like there's plenty of work to do. So if you don't know how to do it or don't know what you want to do, just try things, and then you're like, oh, that sucks. Okay, I'm not that kind of person. Let me try this, and there is so much work that needs to be done, and so many people who are doing it and burning out from doing it. So I think that it's just really making the connection of the people who are like, I want to do something, but I don't know what, and I'm frustrated and I don't know how. And the people who are like, I need some help. I am drowning in all of the needs that we have. And so it's a connection problem that we are hopefully can solve a little bit of.
I mean, I appreciate everything that you all have said, right? This focus on understanding the history, understanding that this is a much bigger sort of question to think about, not just something that's a flash in the pan right now, but something that's been going on a long time, confronting white nationalism in this country, and that there's something to be said about intergenerational activism and learning both from the successes and the failures of folks before, but not being tied to the ways things were done in the past, and trying to have a sense of spirit of trying something new with our activism today. I think those are all sort of really important kinds of lessons and stories to tell, especially for young people today who might, be confronting a world that's, quite scary for them. Um,
Yeah.
so
Well, and also I just want to say, like, not to bring up stupid Elon Musk, but like the way that he's framing like his rocket, whatever, yesterday it like got 30 feet off the ground and then totally blew up. And his framework is like, we learned so much from that experiment. You're like, fucking rich jerk. But also, like, yeah, failure doesn't have to mean like I suck at everything, I have to quit, and that's a very white supremacist thing of like another binary. Like, there's all kinds of things to learn from the failures that we do individually and collectively. So I think like knowing that history and those stories is just as important, even if you don't look as good in them as the successes.
yeah, it's always hard to take lessons right from Elon Musk's successes or failiures. Let
True,
me
but
just ask.
the framing, I was just like, wow, that is some real gall from that he's such a good grifter. Like, okay, good
Yeah.
line.
Yeah, totally. Um, so any final thoughts? Is there anything that you would like to end on? Any kind of note or any kind of question that you felt that we didn't get to, or that you just want to end with as a final note about your involvement in this project and what you would like it to see going forward?
I'd like to just read a quote that's in the book from Bernice Johnson Reagan about coalition work, and it's from the book Homegirls, which is an anthology of Black feminists that was put out by Barbara Smith, edited by Barbara Smith in 1983. And it's coalition work is not done in your home. Coalition work has to be done in the streets, and it is some of the most dangerous work you can do. And you shouldn't look for comfort. Some people will come to a coalition and they rate the success of the coalition on whether or not they feel good when they get there. They're not looking for a coalition, they're looking for a home. They're looking for a bottle with some milk in it and a nipple, which does not happen in a coalition. You don't get a lot of food in a coalition. You don't get fed a lot in a coalition. In a coalition, you have to give, and it is different than your home. You can't stay there all the time. You go to the coalition for a few hours, and then you go back and take your bottle wherever it is, and then you go back and coalesce some more.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for the work that you've done with this podcast and now with the book. It Did Happen Here from PM Press. It's really inspiring to hear not only the 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 way in which you are bringing out these voices of all these folks who have done some really, really hard work, but the ways in which this has brought you all together and given you perspectives about how you can continue to do this work. That is not easy work to do from the standpoint of just listening to the stories and the kind of violence that's underneath it all. Uh, the kinds of lessons that you've all developed about building community and connection with one another, that's also part of the kind of strategies that we need to confront violent white nationalism and neo-Nazism in our country today. So thank you all for your work. This has been really exciting to hear, and I think an example of the kind of stuff that collectives can do together. From on behalf of the Institute for Anarchist Studies and all of us there, we appreciate the time you've spent, and good luck on all the book events. And we hope that we can continue to have these kind of conversations with you all and to support your work.